Hello. Well, so much for best laid plans. I had expected to be doing a lot of videos this year, and this is the first one I've gotten done in 3 months. So I'm sorry about that. But I've decided to go right into another one of the I Ching hexagrams, because that's what my own students are most interested in hearing about. And so today we're going to be taking a look at hexagram number 20. Here we are. Hexagram 20. There we go. Hexagram 20, which is Guan, or contemplating. So this hexagram has below the world and above you have the air element, or the wind. This is a hexagram that you can therefore connect with having to do with the mind, because the air element is connected to the mind, and with the world, because of course the world is connected to the world. The hexagram image is that of wind blowing all across the land. And the word guan can mean to observe or to contemplate, but in ancient times it was also a word that meant a watchtower. So that is to say, a high place. And as you can see, the imagery of the hexagram itself looks like you have a pair of pillars and then a platform on top. So it looks a little bit like a watchtower. But it also looks a little bit like an entrance to a Chinese temple. So like you'd have a pair of columns and an overarching arch or pillar that was the entryway to the temple. And that's important in understanding why the descriptions of this hexagram, why they are the way that they are. So guan as contemplating, it means a state of awareness that provides a kind of a panoramic vision. So you're up on top of a watchtower, you can see all across the land, right? This hexagram is about your perceptions and the difference between having a limited perception and a more vast perception. The description of the hexagram says contemplating. The rite of communion being mastered, you may bypass the technical details of the sacrifice because you are filled with the essence of heaven's virtue. So the rite of communion is to say having that perspective of oneness with what is, overall, with the whole, with the vast elements, right? So when you're on the ground, you can only see what's immediately in front of you. But if you're up in a high place, whether it's a watchtower or a temple, you can have a vaster perspective. And if you have that perspective, then you can have a different approach to what you do in life. Remember that rituals, a sacrifice in this case, that's a type of ritual. Rites in the context of ancient China didn't just mean stuff you did at the temple, but everything you do is a kind of rite, and anything that you do consciously, at least. So it means that when your awareness is at a kind of a beginner stage, you have to make an effort to learn and follow these proper rites, these proper procedures. You have to paint within the lines, so to say. But if you reach a certain level of perspective, then you start being able to see how you can achieve things in different ways, in ways that aren't necessarily the standard or orthodox way. But you have to be sure that you have that perspective first, because if you try to paint outside the lines before you have that perspective, then you're likely to not really accomplish very much. The great work, the section in the, I'm as usual using The Magician's I Ching, my own book, which you can pick up on Amazon. The great work says, rulers of old visited many regions to observe and learn rites, and in turn they instructed the people. So this means that they weren't just satisfied with learning the immediate perspective of their own surroundings, of their own home or their own city or whatever, but rather one of the reasons that they would go and visit the many territories of their kingdom, the rulers of old, was so that they would be able to understand from these different perspectives, because in different places people are going to do things in different ways, right? They're going to learn the essence of how you do things, right? So maybe in one place they cook in a certain way, let's say, and in another place they cook in a different way. And these are all different manifestations of rites of cooking. If you can look at those differences and then find what is essential that you see in all of these things, and then understand how the differences are applied in different places and why, then you can understand the underlying formula of cooking, let's say, right? And you can apply this to everything. You can certainly apply it to cultivation, to mysticism, to meditation. The Confucian commentary says, contemplating means being able to observe the vast picture from a high place. Because the sage has become receptive to nature's virtue, he is respected by all. If one cannot embody heaven yet, he must follow the technical disciplines meticulously in his rites. He who attains to the heavenly essence may now give instructions in any land. So you can become, in other words, you can become a master of the short-term area, right, of the specific area where you're in, by being meticulously disciplined at studying and learning the technique of how things are done in that context, in that place. And that's good, actually. There's nothing wrong with that. But if you have the heavenly essence, if you have the vaster perspective, you can now understand the underlying forces, the underlying elements that many different techniques might have, that many different perspectives might have. So this is all about expanding that perspective of awareness in yourself. So we have the lines. Line 1 at the very bottom says, contemplating childishly is to be expected and may even be a necessary step for the inferior person, but will be unsatisfying and disappointing to the superior individual. So it's saying basically that, people, that you can expect that if somebody has not broadened their horizons, they're going to have a more basic understanding, a more basic perspective of their world and what is around them and how to behave and what to do and of spirituality and of everything else. And that this is kind of typical, that here, as usual in the hexagrams, you have a kind of a hierarchy of the lines, but here it's especially emphasized because it's the top 2 lines that are solid yang lines. They're the strong lines, and all the other ones below are the weaker lines that are looking up towards them. They're or rather, more accurately, those 2 solid lines are radiating down to the broken ones, and so it's saying, this line can be interpreted in many ways depending on how you get it. It might be a signal that you yourself have a very limited perspective of a situation you're asking a question about. Or if you're asking a question about another person, it might be that they have a very limited perspective, and that but it implies also that you have to kind of be understanding of how a person's experience of what they've been able to view will cause that perspective. Line 2 is an interesting one especially in our modern world. It says, spying through keyholes is advantageous to women, though shameful. And so this sounds like a little bit of Zhou dynasty sexism, you could say. But what it actually probably refers to is that in ancient China, there was a custom of arranged marriage, right? Women didn't really have a free choice necessarily of who they were marrying, but they were often, given recommendations, let's say, and they would sometimes get to accept or reject a suitor. But there was kind of an element in Zhou culture that you weren't actually going to be spending a lot of time, and in some cases, especially when you were talking about the higher levels of society, you might not get to actually meet the person that was courting, negotiating with your father to marry you, right? So it was in some ways a common practice that when the suitor came to the home of the father, the prospective bride, she wasn't allowed to see him, but she would presumably often peek through something, try to get a glimpse of him at least, to get some idea just by looking at him whether, to affect her choice, whether she would be in favor of or try to talk her dad out of the marriage. And this was, not proper manners, but as line 2 says, it's advantageous. So the interpretation of this is that sometimes you may have a very limited option of panoramic choice, let's say. You're only able to see so much, but you still have to make a decision about it when you're in a position of weakness, like line 2 is. And in this case, line 2 is supported by a strong line in line 5. So that means that it is an advantage, that to whatever limited information you got is good, right? And that's probably something you should trust. Line 3 says, contemplating virtue and contemplate virtue and judge yourself by that standard. Then you will know whether to go forth or retreat. Line 3 is right at the border between the lower trigram and the upper trigram. And one of the main things it's saying here is that in order to be able to progress, to move forward, you have to apply contemplation to yourself. Once you get past the weakest position, when you're in a position where you're like at the border between real awareness and just kind of experienced inculcation of knowledge, then one of the things you have to learn how to do is look at yourself. And the lines between 3 and, like the line 3 is always kind of a border line, right? It's a line that involves having to make a jump if you're going to keep moving forward. And so sometimes the I Ching advises you to advance, sometimes to retreat. What it's saying here is that the only way you're going to know if you're really making the right choice is to look not so much at the outside, but in this case at the inside, to contemplate yourself and judge yourself by the standard of virtue, to know if you're ready for a decision or not. Line 4 says, contemplate the many different regions of the kingdom. So that mirrors what is said in the great work, right? To travel to many regions. Contemplate the many different regions of the kingdom, observing and learning, and then you will become an honored guest of the king. Line 4 is the minister line, and it's just below the king line. And in this case, they're favorable to each other because it has good support. Line 3 is also connected to line 1. So what it says here is that the minister is going out and exploring all these regions, and learning about what the people are like in each of these regions. That's a very useful thing for a king to know, right? So he will invite this minister as his honored guest and gain knowledge from him. So it's a line that suggests that when you're at this point, what you need to do when you get this kind of a line is that you have to make a vast panoramic study of things at their most basic levels, so that then you will be able to be prepared for any situation that happens at a more advanced level, because you'll understand not just the superficial, but the inner workings of what you are trying to master. Line 5 says, he is viewed with great respect by the people, yet he does not stop examining himself critically. So line 5 says basically, it's the king. The king is in a prime position. It's in the right line, the right type of line, a solid line in the right spot, number 5. It's balanced by the broken line in line 2. So all of that means that it is in a very good situation. And it means that the people below have great respect for the person above. But what it also notes is that to maintain this requires a consistent level of self-reflection. You notice that suddenly the concept has moved outside of reflecting what is, or rather beyond reflecting what is contemplating what is outside to contemplating what's inside. First, you have to understand certain things that are outside of you. And only then can you start to really understand certain things that are inside of you. And if you do this, then you maintain your virtue and you grow in that virtue and you maintain that respect. There's also kind of a note in this that a king can really, the only critic he can really trust is himself. So it's extremely important, if you're in a position of being in authority, let's say, that you are observant of yourself and honest with yourself and critical of yourself. Because obviously everybody below you is either going to be, in awe of you and therefore will respect you, or afraid of you and therefore will not disrespect you, or they're going to want something from you, in which case they're going to flatter you, right? So when you're in this kind of a position, there's only one person that you can trust to be really honest with you if you are able to get them to be honest with you, and that's you. So it's very important that you can keep being a careful, critical examiner of your own self in this sort of situation. Line 6 is the sage line, and it's also a strong line here, and it's also very well reflected, and it says, there is no wrong in being admired for your virtue and conduct, nor is it wrong to ceaselessly continue in your cultivation regardless. It says even at the highest state, at the highest level, you need to continue to engage in that cultivation. There's no point where cultivation stops. It doesn't stop even with enlightenment. So it means that you have to be capable of having this great quality of sincerity with yourself and of discipline with yourself. And it says that there's nothing wrong with being admired, right? But it's also, the implication is also that it shouldn't be the important thing for you at this point. If you're this high up, it shouldn't matter what people think of you one way or the other. It should matter whether you are being sincere in your virtue and in your cultivation. And this is why at this point, the king, because in the time of the Zhu, the king was the one who would go to the shrines to make the sacrifices, right? So only someone who has reached the highest level can perform the rite however they please, because which isn't really however they please. What it means is that they're doing it based on this higher knowledge rather than on the strict line of what is considered the norm. You can break the norms, but only when you understand what all those norms are and why they're there, and then you can know how to maneuver with them, and at what moments you should stick to what is essential, and in what moments you should what moments you must stick to what is essential, and what moments you can or ought to make what looks like an unorthodox approach, but what is actually an adaptation based on what is right at that moment. So you can ignore the technical aspects of the ritual, but you can only do that at the highest level. If you try to do that at any other level and you kind of justify it by, lying to yourself or by what other people are asking of you, then you're going to run into problems. So that's a basic summary of hexagram number 20. As usual, members of the I Society are going to have another video which explains some of the more deeper aspects of this hexagram. And if you're interested in that, well, first of all, if you're just watching one of my videos for the first time, subscribe and check out the rest of the I Society playlist, where you'll see all the other hexagram descriptions and some other stuff, and the other playlists on this channel. And feel free to share this video anywhere you like. But if you're interested in a system of cultivation that includes and is grounded on the study of the I Ching and the practice of inner cultivation of meditation and what's called Qigong, to develop your own awareness, then feel free to get in touch with me about that. Thank you very much.